Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I'm joined by an awesome entrepreneur today that I really think epitomizes that notion of being the change that we wish to see in the world. Because today's guest has lived in the world that he really wants to positively impact and that he is positively impacting. And then when he made it to where a lot of people would be like, gosh, your career, you absolutely made it to the top. Then he realized, well, I don't want to be here. I want to help everybody else make these changes in their worlds in this corner of the industry. So I'm not going to tease it anymore. Let me tell you about today's guest. His name is Dr. Meni Sarris. Dr. Meni Sarris is a 25-year veteran and former dean of continuing and professional education who decided to step away from the dean's desk to make a bigger impact on the education landscape overall. As a believer in education beyond degrees, which is also the name of his podcast, by the way, you're going to see how amazing his energy is because he's a fellow podcaster. He knows this medium well. He's going to bring so much heat here today. Meni firmly believes the education landscape will continue to evolve because students want more flexibility and personalization when it comes to how they get an education, which isn't always reflected as part of the traditional educational model. I know all of us as entrepreneurs, we are slightly rebellious in these means, and we will firmly agree with Meni's approach to this. He believes that continuing in professional education unlocks options for improving the lives and careers of people who haven't always been able to participate for whatever reason in traditional for-credit academic programs. There's a lot more to his story. This is just a little bit of an intro. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Dr. Meni Sarris. All right, Meni, I am so very excited for our conversation today. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Brian, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Heck yeah. I tease listeners a little bit. I'm excited for every episode, but particularly excited about our conversation here today, not only because you're a podcaster, but because you're changing an industry on the whole. Take us beyond the bio. How the heck did you start all these amazing things that you're up to in your career path, as well as with your own business?
Well, listen, education has been a lifetime thing for me. I realized I was in fourth grade when I realized that I wanted to be in education. I wanted to be a teacher because I had an amazing fourth grade teacher. His name was Mr. Novak. And it just started my path to wanting to go into the education field. And it wasn't until I joined a continuing education department at a local community college as a camp counselor that I realized that there's this whole other world outside of traditional education called continuing education. And I had no idea what it was. And because I'm a math guy, because I'm a numbers guy, I slowly realized the business behind education and how continuing education is really the entrepreneurial education world. And so I got addicted. I got addicted real quick. And so when I went to college and I got my bachelor's degree, I did my student teaching and realized there's no way I could just teach for a living because there's so much more out there that I want to do. And so continuing ed was my path. I have, dreamed the dream of creating different pathways for people to get education, realizing that there's so many non-traditional students out there, more non-traditional students than there are traditional students who we define as 18 to 22-year-olds, because there's so many more people who are coming back into the workplace and who want to learn more or, get a new job, or veterans coming back after serving in our military. There has to be a way to get them an education quicker rather than going through this traditional expensive model that's out there. And so I learned different ways of being able to provide programming that allows people to get the training they need. And since I've started, continuing professional education has just exploded. The way that we offer programs, our flexibility, the things that we do within our offices at institutions all over the world has become just so, creative and entrepreneurial that we are now building programs left and right. Corporations and business partners are now taking bachelor degrees as minimum requirements off of their resume or off of their job postings because they see that people could get the training without those degrees. So it's been a really exciting ride, taking it through from that first community college job through my dean's desk. My last university job was at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, which I love doing. And then I moved to the private side, which has been really amazing, working with schools all over the country, doing different consulting projects in educational consulting, organizational development, marketing, recruitment, and then building this new educational technology called Reg, which is a brand new piece in the marketplace.
Yeah, I love that overview, Meni, for so many reasons. But first and foremost, one of my favorite quotes of all time is that very famous Mark Twain quote where he said, "Don't let school get in the way of your education." And when we talk about education, obviously we're going to throw some shade at the way that it's traditionally been done. I love the work that you're doing to change that. You talk about flexibility. Gosh, I mean, I started my first business when I was 19. It was after my freshman year of university. So while I was racking up student loan debt, I was getting that real life practical, you and I obviously are very biased here, but that entrepreneurial experience, the real stuff that set me up for everything that I do today. And what really stands out to me in that overview is you talk about the business that supports all of this stuff. Heck, when we're talking about education, you threw the word marketing in there. And that's what, for me in the sports industry, I love working within the sports industry because I know that when you apply business principles to it, you make the entire industry perform better. You raise the performance of the entire industry. Talk to me about your approach there, because we don't always think of education and business going hand in hand, but obviously so many of those principles elevate that.
Well, I mean, when we think about the traditional system, it's the 4-year college university, way that we go through our education system. And that there are so many rules that go with the 4-year university. There's too many rules. There's too many guidelines. There's accreditation. There's, what the schools need to qualify, how faculty are used, and, how we build up the curriculum from there. And it doesn't allow for a lot of creativity and flexibility because you can't be agile. You can't be quick to respond. There's a process to everything. What continuing ed does is we don't necessarily have to follow all of those rules all of the time. And so when we have the ability to be creative on our own, figure out what the need is and assess that need and then create and develop and offer it immediately, we've created a brand new way. Well, it's not brand new anymore. Continuing ed's been around for hundreds of years, right? We've been around for a long time. It's just the way that it's utilized now. We look at it as a business. When we are building out a program, we're building out a business plan for it. We're really understanding what our expenses are, both direct and indirect, to be able to formulate a way to create that profit margin at the end that allows us to continue to build and grow and move into the next program that we want to develop or the research that we wanted to develop those new programs. So it's not that the traditional side can't have the business aspect to it. It's continuing professional education allows us to have that way to be agile and quick to respond that the traditional system just doesn't allow for.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you talk about this because my landscape, I always believe in and thinking. I believe that the answer to most things is and. It's not usually this or that. It's some combination of all of the above. Paint that picture of the landscape because obviously, just like, for example, I'm going to do a cross-industry analogy. In healthcare, for example, urgent care is kind of all the wave in the world of healthcare right now. And traditional healthcare institutions like major research hospitals are realizing, let's also be in that business. Let's also open urgent care centers under our umbrella. How's all this fitting into and altering the landscape of the educational industry?
So continuing professional education, like I said, has been around for a while. A lot of schools, there are 5,000 colleges and universities in the United States, right? So a lot of them already have these departments that are historically have had continuing professional education. Land-grant universities have had them forever. And so once they've instituted these departments, if they don't already have them, they're doing it because they need to figure out how to be flexible in their offerings. And they're seeing what the market is saying. Right now, we're seeing what's happening in, student enrollment, FTE in colleges and universities. It's been dropping. A lot of schools are having trouble. We see small liberal art colleges closing or being acquired by bigger schools. There's a lot happening in the traditional space because there needs to be quicker changes to what we're doing. And so when continuing professional education is really taking hold of is we're building these programs that are allowing us to figure out how to bring in the students that need the help quickly to be able to help them through their new process to where they want to go. I always use veterans as a really good example, right? So when we see veterans sign up to be in the military at 18 years old, they sign a 4 or 6 year contract, they go in, they do their service, and then when they come out, so many of the jobs several years ago used to require bachelor's degrees. If they didn't work on their bachelor's degree while they were in the military, they're already 22 to 24 years old, having to start back over to get that 4-year degree, even though they've had these life experiences that should count for something. They should be able to utilize that time that they've already put into protecting our country and be able to get a job quickly. So when we think about that as an example, why can't I go out to the marketplace or go out to a company that, let's say I'm in Chicago, right? So we'll say Google, who has a new headquarters here. Why can't I just go to Google, who is actually a really good example, and talk to them about what jobs they need now and then the upcoming future, and figure out how do I build the training programs that they need to get a whole new group of people who qualify for those jobs as without the minimum requirement of a bachelor's degree. So if a vet comes to me and says, hey, I want to go work at Google, I could put them through, I don't know, let's call it a 13-week training program that Google has already approved, take them through that process, and now they're qualified for a job that pays well. If you think about that example, we could translate that to anybody all over the country with any job. And now when we think about how long people are staying in their jobs, which really isn't long, the reports out there are saying anywhere between 2 to 4 years average, people are job skipping and moving around, which, listen, why wouldn't you do that if you're trying to renegotiate your salary up? That's the only way you could do it the best way. So if they're trying to do that and move industries, only continuing a professional education could give you that agility to move quickly, get the training you need, and move into a new space.
Yeah, Meni, I'll tell you what, I could listen to you talk about the landscape of education all day long, but what I love about your story is not only are you passionate about that, but you're passionate about making a change in the industry. So obviously you've been doing Spur Consulting Group for a while. I so love and respect the impact of the work that you're doing. I'm super curious from an entrepreneurial perspective, how receptive the world of education is to a company like yours that is making these changes and ushering in more positive impacts. Really, it positively impacts the students, the academic institutions. It positively impacts everybody. But what's the reception like? What's the way in for you as someone who wants to be an agent of change?
You know, that's a great question because every school is completely different. The good thing about me is I've had relationships in this industry for a long time. Being a former dean, you know, I used to do the conference circuit. I used to present a lot. I used to write a lot with other deans and other people who are leaders in universities. So for that type, for me, I'm lucky because I could have these conversations with people knowing that they know that I understand the industry and understand what the pain points are because I've gone through the pain points, right? So whenever I talk about how we're trying to help, it's always trying to keep it simple. The one thing that I've learned about the other businesses out there who do consulting or ed tech or marketing and recruitment is it's very complicated. That I think it's part of their business plan to make things complicated because typically a lot of people just have to say, yes, I understand that it's going to be complicated. You're the expert. You're going to give us this information. We're just going to have to go with complications. And what we're trying to say is it doesn't have to be complicated. Things can just be that simple. It could be as easy as just doing the research a little bit, identifying your need, and just moving forward with the solution that you need rather than saying, hey, you need this, but you also need this and this to do it. I get why businesses do that, but that's just not how Spur works. We go in, we're very direct. We talk through exactly how we want to help you. So, for example, we built Reg, which is a registration product for continuing professional education built in Salesforce. The entire idea behind Reg is to create a piece of technology that makes life simple for the university. The people out there who are currently doing similar products or they're doing registration products, legacy registration products, they've made everybody think that it's complicated, that it's hard, that implementation is hard, that there's customizations, all of this, these big words and these big invoices that get sent in. And we just come in and be like, we never understood why it was like that. Here's what it is. Here's what you get. And this is exactly how you should be looking at it. It doesn't have to be complicated. And that could go exactly through how you look at your organization, how you do your marketing and recruitment, how your programs are built and researched. All of this we're trying to say is it is a little easier than you think. So let us help you with the simplification of it for your own organization.
Yeah, you're really bringing up some of my favorite quotes and words of wisdom from people way smarter than us, Many. What comes to mind right now is that very famous Albert Einstein quote where he says, if you want to impress someone, make it complicated. If you want to help someone, make it simple. And I think that's so powerful. And that's why when I look at your work, and I'm so excited for listeners to check out your website, I'm going to plug that link real quick. It's spur.group, spur.group. We'll talk about it at the end of today's episode. But as soon as someone lands on your website, they can see how I'm just going to call it a framework. Like you really have these frameworks, the fundamentals that you lean on to make these things simple, because we're talking about, let's remember listeners, we're talking about the world of education. There's a lot of moving parts. Many already introduced us to some of them, the technology behind it, the humans behind it, the curriculum behind it. There's so much behind it, but Many, part of your approach at the Spur Group, I want to hear one of these frameworks that you lean on, because I can see it on your website, the STEER model. I think it's so brilliant the way you break it down. Talk to us about your approach there.
Yeah, so ultimately the work that we do is design thinking. It's all based in discovery and figuring out how to test a hypothesis and work through it, right? Ultimately, we're still academics at heart. Everybody who I work with on my team, we all come from the continuing professional education space, and we are academic in the way that we do it, but we do it with design thinking in mind. So when we built the STEER model, it's just our design thinking model and how we work. It all starts in discovery, right? We start in our research phase and move through the synthesis and trying to evaluate and figure out how do we get to that endpoint, which is the resolution. So when we talk about STEER, it's just how we do our work. There's no change to it. Every project that we do, no matter what group in the Spur Group it is, we're always working through this STEER model. And, a lot of people, when we put it on our proposals or when they look at it on the website, they're just like, oh, okay, it's how they work. But I don't think people really understand how deep that thinking goes in everything that we do, right? So from the moment that we meet, from the moment that we start doing a proposal with you, or from the moment we start working with you, we're already in that STEER model. We're already in that discovery approach and really getting acquainted with what we're doing. And every conversation that we're having, it's just another informational point that guides us into what we need to do to get you through to resolution and all those in any project that we do. So when we developed the STEER model, it was our version of design thinking, because we've always looked at design thinking as the simplest way to get to an answer. And so going with what we always do, keeping it simple, we just thought it would be smart to build our own design model.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I also love, listeners know that we do this with every single one of our guests. We always ask them before the show, what's your zone of genius? And Meni, your answer is particularly awesome because quite simply, I'll sum it up as you zig where others may zag. And I would imagine that your very diverse range of experiences from been inside of it, you've worked on the peripheries of it, there's so much involved in that. How do you zig when others zag? Because I would argue that we can see examples more abundantly clearly than ever before. We are in the information era and we get bogged down. We get put into these boxes, these mental boxes, the creativity boxes. I would argue that AI is either limiting or expanding it. I'm not quite sure yet how we all use that. But with all of that in mind, how do you start zigging when everyone else is zagging?
I mean, I've been there, right? I've been behind the dean's desk. I've been in every position in continuing professional education, and I've seen how those positions work and what goes into it. I was also trained by people that have been doing this for years and years and years. So if we continue down that path of just following what has been done from the people that have trained us, we're not really being revolutionary, or we're not experimenting in new things. And so what continuing professional education allows us to do is to experiment with new programs, with new ideas, with new ways to set up an organization, with new technologies. And when we talk about zigging when others zag, it's more of like, we need to try new things because everybody's being so innovative. How are we going to bring that into the educational space and respond to what the market is asking for? I mean, ideally, it's just when we go back to talking about education as a business, if a business is seeing something in the market happen, they're just going to adjust to try to respond to what the market is saying. We have to do that in education, and continuing professional education allows us that flexibility to do it. So every time that we see a problem that needs to be solved, our first thought is, okay, how can we solve that problem? And again, I'll go back to the technology, the piece of technology with Reg. there are a lot of legacy players in the market, but there's also such a great opportunity to create something so much easier that everybody could use without those complications. So why not just build something and offer it up as what it's supposed to be? Because we can do something just that easily that doesn't have to make things complicated.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you say that, because I also know how intentional you are in your approach to all of these things and how much thought you've given to your industry as a whole. And I can't help but, when we talk about the blending of business and educational institutions, thinking about incentives. Maybe it's because I'm biased. I was an economics and finance major in undergrad, and I'll never forget my first really impactful economics professor. He said, "What is economics?" And we all said, the study of markets, the study of this. And he said, "No, it's the study of the allocation of scarce resources and how we incentivize people to manage those." Let's talk about those incentives, Meni, because when we think about business, we think about, obviously, profits. A lot of us, and in good ways, I know myself and yourself included, we think about the positive impact that comes along with that. Education, we think about, obviously, the world of academia is to learn, to grow, to develop skills and knowledge. How do incentives play into the way that you view the market? How can we align incentives? How can we leverage incentives to make better decisions? Super curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I guess my first thought comes to how are we defining an incentive here, right? In my mind, an incentive would be, how do we hit a success point within our organization? And how do we get there, right? So to incentivize that success point is really, there's typically two goals, right? One is to get more enrollments, and two is to get more revenue and build out that profit margin and continuing professional education. So how do we get to that point? So the incentive and, kind of the idea of how do we get there, our creativity allows for us to be able to build programs that, one, make it more accessible for students, but two, also create these other pathways that are obstacle free, right? Our programs are typically cheaper. They're typically faster. They typically help people through the career process to get a job, because we're looking at those three things as the most important things to meet those goals of getting more enrollments and building out revenue. So our big incentive is ultimately accomplishing that goals. When we talk to continuing professional education teams, typically the dean has the overview of what the entire organization is doing, but then they have, maybe an associate dean, an assistant dean, and then coordinators who oversee the different program areas, right? The incentive for those program areas are to build out new programs that bring in the students, that bring in the revenue, that ultimately create this, this large portfolio of programs that also does the other big thing that we're supposed to be doing in education, is working with our communities, right? So when we bring all of those pieces together, that incentive is to build those programs, to bring in people from our community, to then generate the revenue that we need to meet those goals. And, the other things that we have going on, that also incentivize us is there's a lot of federal and state monies that are available for the programs that we build, which allow us to continue to build out our portfolio. And we could do more for our communities. We could do more for our at-risk populations. We could do more to bring in more of the community members to get the education or the training that they need to keep on moving up. And at a time like this, when we're dealing with inflation and figuring out who's getting jobs and why people aren't going back to jobs, or people who are still looking for jobs, how can we help support those people in our communities to get there? These are all pieces that incentivize the people that are doing the work to do better work. Because when you're continuing professional education, honestly, you're doing this work because you love it. Whenever I talk to somebody and they're thinking about becoming a teacher or getting into the education space, I always tell them, listen, you should try continuing education. You're going to get addicted, though, and you're not going to leave, because it is just so fun seeing how you can do education as a business rather than being in the traditional model, and actually seeing the impact that you make for students every day. I remember when I was at UNLV, one of my best memories I've ever had in all my career was watching a paralegal certificate program. So at UNLV, we had a paralegal program. Students could complete the certificate and they can move on. And after, I can't remember offhand, maybe it was like 16 weeks or 6 months or something like that, they could go and qualify for a job that pays them typically $65,000 to $95,000, which is, to some people, that is an unbelievable jump from the minimum wage they were making to this after just a few months. And I remember attending and, I'm not going to say keynoting, but like being the speaker at this paralegal graduation, the energy in that room and the excitement of people who are giving themselves an opportunity because we offered the program that allowed them to get these jobs. It is nothing like you've ever seen before. I've been to hundreds of commencements. I've been in my robe. I've been there. I've graduated myself. The energy at commencements are great. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, 5 or a 6. This paralegal graduation was like the most energy I've ever seen. It was easily a 10. The tears were
Heck, that's why a lot of us get going. Up front, obviously, business doesn't just miraculously succeed overnight. It's the positive impact that we get to make that keeps us going. And I'm going to call this out for listeners because I think it's a really brilliant insight into the way that you think, is both in the Google example that you gave us a little bit earlier, as well as the way that you just answered this question. Is it all comes down to, what is that end goal? If that end goal is to help people get continuing education so that they can achieve their dream job or get into it, now let's backtrack from that. Let's put the pieces of the puzzle together because we already know that destination. I think it's such important insights. And it makes me really want to ask you this, because that is obviously, that sort of reverse engineering is both academic in mindset, but also it's something that benefits all business owners. We get wrapped up in all the paths that we could take to our first, let's say for a lot of people, maybe it's their first 100K in revenue, maybe their first million in revenue. With your entrepreneur hat on, what type of business application do you see missing from this world of continuing education? Is it a messaging problem? Is it a marketing problem? Obviously, you help people with the full stack of it, but what's really missing from that world of continuing education right now?
Yeah, it's the buy-in from the traditional side, right? I think if you were to ask any continuing professional education dean or director or whatever the title is at that institution, it is, how do I get buy-in from the administrators on the traditional side, whether it's the chancellor, the president, the provost? How do I get buy-in for them to realize what we're trying to do is complementary to what they're doing? We're not trying to supplement all the programs that they're doing. We're really trying to complement and bring in an additional group of students that aren't looking for that traditional way of doing it. And this has been the conversation for years. I would say maybe it's not 100%, but I would say in 99% of the conversations that I have about doing some type of consulting project, the question always comes up: how am I going to sell this to my president? Or how am I going to sell this to my provost? And the question is always, well, what are they looking to get? Do they need money? Have they seen their tuitions go up and their enrollments go down and they need more money? We could talk about it from a revenue perspective. Are they looking just for more students? Are they looking for students to come in maybe as a path to get a graduate degree after they've completed something within the university through continuing professional education? So how we speak to the administrators within the institutions and getting their buy-in to figure out, listen, continuing professional education has to be its own unit. And there's so many names. It could be continuing ed, professional and continuing education, extension, extended studies, continuing studies. There's 100 different ways that we've named these departments. But how do we get these continuing and professional education departments to complement what we're doing in the rest of our colleges and the university overall to make it better for everyone while helping our communities? That's what we're really trying to figure out. And that's always going to be the most difficult question. Now, we do have a lot more presidents that are currently being hired who have that business acumen and understand the business of continuing and professional education. So there's a lot more collaboration happening. But I would say in more than 50% of the schools that have some form of continuing professional education, there's still that struggle to get that buy-in all around in order to really build it up to where it is a leading a leading or part of the organization or that institution.
Yeah, gosh, Meni, I'll tell you what, I really appreciate how great you are at articulating your thought process and the strategy behind the way that you think about these things, because the more that I hear it, the more I'm just like, I want your strategic insights as an entrepreneur now. Like, it's fun for me to get to talk to you, not only as an industry expert, but entrepreneur to entrepreneur. And with that in mind, I want to squeeze this in as we're towards the end of our session here today. But I want to squeeze in this question to hear your thoughts on it, because it sounds to me like you're trying to solve these problems on both a micro and macro level. Obviously, there's a lot to be changed in the entire landscape of the educational world and the way that employers view the products of who's coming out of the educational world. But obviously, we can only make changes on that micro level. What's your plans, both short-term and long-term, for addressing these things on both those micro and macro levels? Or is it one school at a time, as cliche as that may sound?
I would... My university to say, hey, we're going to move all of our curriculum fully online. They'd be like, you're crazy. That's never going to happen. And then we saw it happen, which allowed us now to figure out, okay, what more can we do? Because we aren't serving the entire student population the way that we need to be doing. So we need to think creatively. And so continuing professional education, we've been doing this forever, right? Like, there's no secret here. But now that we're seeing the flexibility come university-wide, this opportunity is really, really growing, and we're seeing bigger collaborations. We're seeing a lot of continuing and professional educations now change into colleges of continuing studies, which mean that we're working more with the faculty. The faculty are seeing those opportunities. The administration is beginning to see those opportunities. And now that we know that the traditional systems could be more responsive and actually change quickly, we still have to deal with accreditation. We still have to deal with, the rules that are set in place with the traditional model. But just these hints of change that are happening, I see a big change going to happen. Now that we see that companies like Google are taking bachelor's degree as off of their job postings as a minimum requirement, what is that telling us? Like, if we just build the programs that the students need to get the jobs, there's going to be a big path forward for these colleges of continuing studies, continuing professional education departments to be a leader within those universities, not such an afterthought.
Yeah, gosh, this really makes me so appreciative that you are also taking it upon yourself to not only be a leading voice in this industry, but also a fellow podcaster, obviously pushing the industry forward and having that platform. You bring amazing guests on and really have these conversations in public, which I so respect. So I think there's so much more to hear from your perspective on this, as well as so many other experts within the industry. And I'm glad that you're doing that through your show and through all the other work that you do. But before we wrap up today's session, I always love giving my guests the hardest part of the episode, which is somehow summarizing a takeaway for all the entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs that are tuning in and they're hearing this big, visionary, really impactful work that you're doing in your industry. Meni, what's your advice for them as someone who is maybe a few steps ahead of listeners in your own business and entrepreneurial journey? What's your best advice that you hope they take away from today's episode?
Man, what a great question. I would say you got to do something you love. You have to be working as an entrepreneur in something that you love to do because you are in it all day, every day. There's no breaks when you're trying to build a company that is trying to make a difference or an impact. For me, continuing professional education has been my life. It's been my passion. I've been doing it since I was 17 years old. And I found something that every day I wake up knowing that I want to do it and figuring out new ways to make a change. So to any entrepreneur out there, it starts with what you're passionate about. Sure, a project might not go well. An idea might not be successful at first, but if you continue to pursue it and there's people who are listening and acknowledging and understanding what you're trying to do, if you just keep working at it and you have that passion and that drive, the chances, I don't even know what the chances are, but the idea that you can be successful in doing something that you love is just the best path forward, because you'll find that fulfillment on a daily basis, which is what I do in continuing professional ed.
Yes, amen to that. I so deeply love and appreciate that message that you just shared with all of our listeners around the world. I'm going to tack on to that, because not only may it not work at times, it will not work at times. And that's exactly why that impact, that passion is what will keep you going through those hard times until you get to the other side, which is where all the success lies. So I absolutely love that advice from you, Meni. On that note, I know that listeners are going to be keen. I've already kind of teased them a little bit about your website and how they can see all the great stuff you're doing there. I always like to say that success leaves clues. If you guys want to see why Meni is making such an impact in his industry, go to his website. So Meni, with all of that said, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here to check out all the great work that you're up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So the website is spur.group. That's the homepage of the URL. We have 5 different groups within the Spur group, which are the consulting group, technology, marketing, learning, and people's group. You can check out what we're doing. We'll have some case studies posted. Our podcast, which is called the Education Beyond Degrees podcast, is also on there. And as always, you can find me on LinkedIn. I am highly responsive to people who reach out to me, especially if they have questions about the education space or, continuing professional education, or if they're looking for a job. One of the things that I find to be something that I really enjoy doing is helping people who are looking to get into our space find those jobs. And I have a big network. So if you ever need help, just reach out to me. LinkedIn is a great place to get connected with me.
Yes, listeners, you see how generous Meni is here with not only his knowledge, his time, his experience, but also how generous that offer is to be part of your extended network of amazing entrepreneurs with great networks. So take him up on that. Scroll down below wherever it is that you're tuning into today's episode. You'll find a link to his business website at spur.group. That's spur.group. We're also linking to his podcast as well as his personal LinkedIn. So Meni, on behalf of myself and all the listeners, thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate you having me.